plant, so it's to say, getting parts of the hemp plant.
Yep.
Following hemp plant, it should say, or products. And then I'm not clear on who we're talking about AFCO, we're talking about FDA, it's not clear what the approved is. So
AFCO
who's
and
who's
FDA.
the subject, or,
Kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
Ultimately, FDA approves.
Right,
okay, so approved by FDA.
right.
And then ingredient, of course, should be pluralized too, so it's not an ingredient, it should just be ingredient with an S.
Should I go ahead and make
Yeah,
these? or-
see what, by the way, we're going to use track changes. If those of you who've seen this and those of you who are participating online should be able to see Scott's screen. He's just going to make those edits and then let's debate them and we can walk them right back. It's easy to zero in and then we'll just do a quick check to make sure that we think that is the right question. Okay? So, Scott's making the edits. Ingredients, and we're good.
So putting products, Richard, putting products in there is gonna muck up your sentence, because FDA is gonna
Exactly.
approve products.
Yeah.
Exactly.
This is Bill Book, and
Thank you.
I agree with that.
Absolutely.
I
So
think
do I.
products should not be included. If you're talking, let me ask you, David, are you talking about finished products that a consumer would purchase?
Yes.
Other things like extracts, oil.
Those are
You
ingredients.
squeeze the seed, you get hemp seed oil out, that's.
Those are ingredients.
Still part of the plan.
When I see products, I think finished product.
Right.
That's
Okay.
what a consumer gets.
Exactly. You're correct.
Raw materials are products too.
No.
There's
They're-
something you're making from the plant, that's a
Not
product.
under these definitions.
Not the way that they
Exactly.
call it. The point is, oil's still on it's considered an ingredient, it's a component of the plant, yeah? So it's still, I'm just trying to say whether, because there's a technical, FDA does not approve products,
That's right.
right?
FDA didn't approve anything, they grant permission to market.
Right.
Fair enough.
You know, so, yeah, products, people are gonna think of finished product, you know?
I think we would agree in the livestock industry, the cattle industry, dairy industry, et cetera, that we need to break that down by species as well.
Mhm.
And, because the labeling is gonna be species specific. And it'll even be specific amongst ruminants between dairy and cattle for
I got you.
consumption.
So then your proposal would be hemp plant approved as ingredients
Per species, or.
for use or for use
Yeah.
for a given
Yeah,
species.
and I think it'll
or
ultimately be
species.
easier on everybody. I mean, you're gonna have to do that anyway, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And
Well,
it's,
but why would we introduce species here if we're gonna go for everything?
Well,
If we said in
I don't
earlier
think
meeting,
I mean, for us, just based on the broader sense of, I mean, just look at dairy cattle versus, beef cattle. I mean, because of the milk use, there's gonna be a difference in labeling. That's one thing. The other thing is that based on how the plant is segregated, or what sections of the plant will be used for cattle versus pet food, can be very different. Which is ultimately where we'll get with that conversation as we break it out via species. I mean, isn't your labeling works that way today?
labeling is different depending on the target species,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, and so are your trials, so are your tests, so are your
Right.
labeling. So I assume at some point you guys you'll look at a hierarchy of approach
Yeah.
that you wanna take.
So question 5 really raises the issue of target
Yeah,
species,
that'll work.
right?
That'll work, as long as we have that cross tabs.
Yeah,
Bill Hamrick?
Yes, this is Bill Hammond. Greg, I have a question,
Sure.
and maybe I've missed it here. These are all questions today. When do we get to the answer?
So we're gonna have 2 half-day workshops in which we're gonna debate these things. Beforehand, if anybody thinks they can answer it, we're gonna share information. In other words, like, hey, look, that's already been solved. Take a look, it's here. So we're gonna share information before, we'll debate them, take a break where we explore other ideas further, and then we'll have a second workshop again. So that's when we debate them. Okay?
Thank you.
We won't have time to answer them, and it would be a bad expectation to set.
okay.
Other changes. Anybody on the phone want to make a proposal for a change to one of the questions?
Approved by who? Oh, okay, it was all the first question.
Could I interject? This is Bill Bookout. To question number 2, challenges or obstacles to be addressed, submitting application, any part of the hemp plant to become approved ingredient. Isn't CBD worthy of note in here somewhere? Again, if there were a CBD limit, there is no CBD limit that I'm aware of. Shouldn't we address CBD because
Number 6.
Well,
number 6?
can I just
Oh,
clarify?
CBD allowable, sorry.
Can I clarify just the position of the hemp industry on that issue, period? This is Veronica. So in industrial hemp, our plants, we have more than just CBD. CBD is like beta carotene, for example, in a carrot plant.
Yeah.
It's one of our compounds, it's one of our byproducts.
Yeah.
But we do have other cannabinoids, compounds, and derivatives. So in my opinion, if we are going to look at any other cannabinoids such as CBD, we need to look at all the cannabinoids. We can't just put ourselves in a CBD box and figure out a level that's approved or not approved, because I know it says it there, but
So does question 6 need to be changed?
Yes.
To be more all-inclusive?
if we're going to address cannabinoids other than THC, yes, it should say cannabinoids, not just CBD. Because
Well, let me
that's
tell you why
yep.
CBD's up there before you delete it.
Yeah.
There is a drug application in for CBD by GW Pharma right now.
Well,
It's
that's
FDA.
so they have the patent use on the government's patent,
Right.
and they are about to get FDA approval
Right,
to go into the mainstream market
That's right.
by the end of the summer.
Yeah.
So yes, and that CBD is very problematic in part because of what GW has use on that patent right for right
Right.
now.
so what should that question say?
Cannabinoids.
Yeah.
Should cannabinoids,
Yeah.
including CBD?
Yep.
Well, they're all constituents of the.
They're all
CBD.
constituents.
Exactly.
CBD, CBN, CBG.
Yeah.
I mean, they're all derivatives of A and B and
Yeah.
all kinds of different things.
Is that
Actually,
correct?
you're done, so.
Yep. CANNABIONI. Yep.
So is that the correct verbiage?
Yes.
Well, maybe.
Yeah, I would agree with
These
that.
people extract terpenes too.
Terpenes are not psychoactive. There's already a thriving terpene industry.
Well, neither is almost any cannabinoid. There's
So
one
cannabinoids
cannabinoid that
include
is
CBD.
psychoactive.
Yes.
I mean, if we're talking about residual compounds, cannabinoids and terpenes are probably the predominant ones that are extracted for commercial purposes.
Should we say compounds?
Can we
instead of-
actually
Because the
change that?
compounds would be more general.
Can we say
I'm
what
pretty
is the
averse
naturally
to
occurring
say
level?
that.
Oops, hang on, one at a time. So, Wendy?
Actually, the regulators can speak to the regulation of terpenes probably better than me, but, terpenes are used in breweries, and there's no need to regulate terpenes. So
Right.
the question is, what has not been regulated? What is not approved? What is not approved are the cannabinoids.
Okay, that's a proposal. There was someone on the horn who wanted to chime in. Someone on the phone? All right, Veronica?
I would just ask to the regulators on the phone, Charlotte, Megan, Richard, Bob, is that verbiage, you agree with that verbiage? You okay, I guess?
Maybe we lost them.
So I'm gonna default to Charlotte.
They don't want to answer that.
Charlotte, you got an opinion on that? Charlotte, are you on mute? Any of the other regulators want to ask whether that's the right question? And Mark's got a comment in the room. Mark?
I have a question. On number 6, should we specifically label which cannabinoids we wanted to test for right now? Because if we leave that fairly broad right now, then that can sort of, I think, get things off track. So the medical marijuana market, there was 5 regulated cannabinoids. But for the hemp industry, it might be better just to test for those 5 or additional species such as CBG, something that we, I don't know. So my question is, should we just specifically name out those cannabinoids?
Okay.
I think we should remove number 6 totally, in my opinion. Because
Do you
right
think
now,
that question should be eliminated?
I do. I feel that the only thing right now, regulatory purpose, both on federal and state levels, the only thing they look at is THC levels. THC is what differentiates between marijuana and hemp right now, and that's it.
Well, I get it, but that's right now.
Right.
As soon as that drug application is approved, that's gonna introduce CBD into the equation.
Right, and so that will probably Potentially, there's a lot of possible ramifications that could happen to the hemp market and the CBD market once GW does get federal approval.
That's absolutely true, and that's why, Charlotte, are you on the phone?
I don't see her in the list.
Bummer.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because ultimately FDA is gonna have to answer that question. Let's say this committee establishes a level of CBD, 0.3%.
Well, they've already answered it.
Whatever it is. When that drug application goes through, that may change whatever we come up with. That would ultimately be an FDA question, so.
Well, FDA considers it Schedule 1 right now, and if GW Pharmaceutical, when that approval happens, it will stay Schedule 1, most likely. And it's prohibited for any animal consumption or human use at this point. At this point.
But again,
At any
what
level. At any level, at this point.
So it's gotta be 0? So I thought you guys said as hemp producers that there would be some residual.
I'm sure FDA will grant us some parts per million.
Exactly.
You would think so, it'd have to be something
Yeah,
above.
which I think makes the question viable.
Well,
Right.
that's fine. Can we just add naturally occurring then? Because there's a difference between naturally occurring in their world versus extract concentrate levels of cannabinoids. So there's two different levels. Naturally
But
occurring.
Would naturally occur, this is Scott, would naturally occurring imply you're talking about the plant before processing?
No, naturally occurring would be like if I pressed the hemp seed oil out and there was 0.002, milligrams of CBD naturally occurring in the hemp press seed oil. If I extract it with a solvent, they don't consider that naturally occurring
But what
anymore.
about normal harvest? Is the entire plant harvested, cut off like stalks of corn for silage, and so there's some residual from the tops?
Well,
We
there's
thresh,
many different ways.
yeah, there's a few different, we thresh with the combine, separate the seed,
Yeah.
send the seed to be
But what I'm
conditioned.
saying is residual, maybe something from other naturally occurring.
Different
that
levels.
grow, right? Could be a result of processing, as Scott said.
And I would assume what they're concerned about is not what was originally there, but what is there as it's presented to the animal.
Right, so the levels.
I think that's a really key question and should stay.
Okay, all right. Anybody on the phone want to jump in?
Yeah, this is Richard.
Hey, Richard.
When you guys are talking naturally occurring and synthetic or whatever the version is, there's only going to be a regulation or a definition that surrounds what you test for. So unless you can test natural versus the other, just figure it's total cannabinoids present.
Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah.
Any other comments on the phone? David?
When we say intranormal processing, that's not clear whether referring to any stage of processing or just final processing. And what I've seen developing in the law is a recognition that in the course of processing, there's going to be concentration of material, and there's going to be some level that may not be acceptable in the finished, and that's really where the direction is focused then, is on the finished product. So we might want to put after normal processing something like the
Or
phrase
how about-
finished product.
Yeah, in finished product instead of after.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because a lot of this processing, it's impossible not to have great concentration. All right,
Yeah, this is Chris, and then I would agree with that statement.
Okay,
Can I add a question?
absolutely.
Okay, my question I would like, go ahead.
Go ahead on the phone.
Sorry, this is Kristen Green with Division of Reg Services. If we are going the ASCO ingredient definition route, or if that's kind of where we expect this to go,
Yes.
then I would kind of echo what Richard said, in that what you usually see, and we could form our question kind of the same way, is what you usually see is you see limits put on ingredients. So rather than phrasing this as a what level is allowable, the way it would show up in an ingredient definition would be more of a maximum allowable, maximum level, based on, again, what can be tested for.
So instead of residual, just say, what is the maximum allowable level of cannabinoids or cannabinoids, depending on how you pronounce it, allowable in the finished ingredient? Kristen, is that right?
Yeah, I would agree.
Round about that, yeah.
Close enough. Okay. Okay. So, Veronica was going to propose a new question.
Yeah, my question I'd like to propose is what existing studies are available currently? So the studies that we can work off of that have already been approved in other countries?
Yeah. So one thing that this is a bit of a
Is that a regulatory question though, or a?
Yes. Well, it's in
safety
all
and-
of the,
or
it's
nutrition
all
and
of,
safety
it's actually
kind of,
all of the work groups.
you know,
Yeah, I think each of the work groups is going to use, to the degree available, existing studies to answer these and potentially to accompany any sort of recommendation. I see that as a vehicle. I don't know if it, I'm not opposed to adding it.
Yeah, I
but
mean,
think
we
it
need to
is-
know what studies I think are out there
Yeah,
for our own purposes, and it answers a lot of questions.
I almost feel like for every, if the left column is the question,
Yeah.
available studies is the column directly to the right. And then to the right of that would be something like potential conclusions or potential recommendations.
what wording do we want here? What studies currently exist that would support?
Or just around hemp and animal feed.
Nutritional benefits.
Well, I mean, don't we want to tie it into the approval process that could be used in the approval?
Yeah, what current studies are existing that that would be approved for AFCO submission?
Well, current studies that support the nutritional benefits of
Yeah.
hemp.
Yeah.
This is Wendy. I wonder if an additional question might be, what other countries have approved, just for our information. So who has approved it, based on what? In general, we're going to look at the studies, but based on what and how they're regulating it too.
Question mark, and that's good. Good with the addition there. I think that's precursor information. It'd be really, really helpful to know. So Terry, you had your.
Yeah, so let me narrate something a little bit, and you guys can help me through it a little. So, we're talking here all about regulated, i.e. processed feedstuffs. In livestock, we feed a lot of harvested commodities that
Yes.
never go through
Right.
a regulatory process. You just elaborated on how harvesting can take on anything from the whole plant to parts of the plant. So you could have, and that's generally why certain things are recognized as potentially adulterated. I mean, there's nobody out there inspecting those necessarily, or there can be, but it's quite expensive to do that. The state doesn't come out, the feds don't come out and test our hay, for instance. They don't test our silage, for instance, but it's very easy to have a section of the plant enter into that feed stuff that shouldn't be there. So what ultimately happens is they test the resulting product, i.e. they'll do tissue, bone, et cetera, test in a processing plant. And by then it's too late. Or more importantly, what's gonna happen is other states or other countries will look at what is approved, and they'll say either label and test, improve, or you're disallowed from allowing those products to enter into the system. Which takes me back to really the impotence of this has to go back to who's selling and using the feed stuff, which really begs the question between the nexus of the species of the animal and the portion of the plant that's being fed. And I don't know that that's well enumerated on this list. i.e. it's fine to feed stalks and leaves or something like that to cattle, but you can't do whole plant hay or silage. So we're gonna have to struggle with that a little bit here. And I'll tell you, it's much more complex. Well, you'd say it's just illegal to do that in Colorado. And then if something happens, then it goes back and goes through a trace out. We have systems for that and it gets dealt with. But if you're silent on it, I can assure you that the livestock industries are going to there's going to be resistance met with that, because then it will be wholesale regulation of the products that's derived in the state. i.e. the meat from the
Right.
animals or the milk. So we're gonna have to struggle with that a little bit. It's not going to be very simple, and it's certainly not gonna be simple on those that are harvesting the product.
We had invited Richard Atkinson from USDA FSIS. Unfortunately, due to a family emergency, he couldn't be here today.
Sure.
So that perspective
Yeah.
would have really helped.
Yeah, but FSIS will test, is what they'll do. The issue is, that's great as long as there's something in statute that says what you can feed and what you can't feed.
And in Colorado, there currently is it is a prohibited act to feed adulterated feed to food-producing animals.
So if you want to get around that adulterated component, you're going to have to regulate the harvesting and the sale of the product.
What do you
Why
mean?
not just final limits?
Yeah, what do you mean by regulate the harvesting?
Well, it could be limits.
Okay.
Well, you can't do whole plant processing.
But
in
like
other
Wendy
words.
said, because we're traditional pollinated crops, we go through in with the combine just like a corn farmer or bean farmer would. Go in with the
Sure.
combine, all the hopper, throws in all our
Probably.
seed, and we go
Yep.
clean it at this granary.
The difference between that and corn is there's nothing in corn that's considered adulterated.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the difference.
I think limits is
And
kind
limits are
of the
great.
clearest.
Limits
Yeah.
are great,
And the
but you're
final
gonna have
ingredient.
to test though.
Right, exactly.
So that's part of that regulation of the still itself downward is to
Sure.
ensure that all feedstuffs are tests coming off of the farm.
Well, going back to your corn analogy, aflatoxin.
Yeah,
would
but
be, and it's tested for.
it is, but there are some things that you can deal with aflatoxin related curing and some things along those lines of the product that you can get around too, and you can,
Then you're exempt from testing?
When you say
not all corn
Well,
products.
it's not required, but
No.
most feed mills test.
Yeah, they'll test
Before
for
they
it, and
receive it.
they can do some things to deal with aflatoxin.
So here's a question. Are we really getting at non-processed? In other words, if we start to make a feed that has been in some way processed, right? Do we then have to address whole plant usage as well?
If you're talking about a non-processed product, i.e. that it doesn't go into a fabricated feed, then it's simple. You just don't feed any part of the hemp plant that's in a non-processed feedstuff to livestock.
So I think the question could be, how should we address non-processed?
So, I mean, it's my understanding, and those folks, this is Terry again with Colorado Cattlemen, it's my understanding that if a crop for some reason fails for whatever reason,
0.3 and above.
yeah,
Above
that
0.3.
there's a sense that even regardless of lignin content and some things like that make it a challenge to feed livestock, there's a sense that you can, but ensiling's one way to get around that. You can feed that to livestock. It's at least an outlet as opposed to burning a field.
But if it tests above 0.3, it is not hemp, it's marijuana.
Yep.
Right, but he's saying you
Which
could
would
feed
not
it.
be an approved.
Well,
That's a good question.
okay, so let's just clarify
it's no
that.
longer
Can we clarify that just so everyone's on the same page about how hemp is working for testing? So you're right. So the testing for hemp happens 0.3 and below is hemp. If it goes above 0.3, we are not allowed to put it on the consumer market. It is not allowed to leave the registered premise. You can apply for a waiver for up to 1%. It just gives you protection so law enforcement doesn't basically come raid you. You're still under CDA. It still doesn't grant you permission to sell it, go off the consumer market. If you want to eat it or have your pigs eat it or whatever, you can. It just can't go off that
And
premise.
just a byline there, we'd have a problem with feeding it to any livestock.
Absolutely. Right. But if it was your own animals or something
No,
that
we'd
was
have a
going on the
problem with
consumer
that, too.
market.
Oh,
Not going on the
Yeah,
consumer
for their own
market.
consumption.
Yeah, for their own
Yes,
consumption,
yep.
so long as there's an adequate withdrawal period, because ultimately most of them go on to the consumer market sooner or later.
So what if we were to propose, we'll work with Terry, propose a question that addresses that, because it seems like there's I don't know if you properly call it a conflation, but as soon as something goes onto the market as available processed, does the market think, aha, therefore I can do this the old-fashioned way? I don't know. Is it okay if we just work on
Yeah,
that
I mean,
question?
we can. I mean, I don't know that I'm the best one to work on it. I can put parameters around it, but
Can I
I mean,
just-
part of the goal here is to not sets a regulatory hurdle that the industry can't try to find opportunity and success.
Right.
And so there's several ways you can go with it. I don't know what the question is off the top of my head though.
That wouldn't be addressed by Charlotte's not to exceed limits?
I think the final limit seems like the
The
final
thing.
test.
It would be if the industry's comfortable with testing every bit of the product regardless of its self-use or.
Well,
for sale.
whether or not they test, there is a standard there would be a standard you could test for. Whether or not they test every batch or have a skip out or whatever, there would at least be a standard,
Yeah.
like there is now, .3.
But the standard's
Exactly.
irrelevant if you don't test.
Right.
Well,
And that's
So-
why they're self-regulating.
True.
you know,
Yes,
Yeah.
from our perspective, when we have limits on something, we don't test every single batch that all the companies make. We may do surveillance testing.
Sure, you do
If
a
we have a
statistical
complaint,
sampling.
we would test under those circumstances. But the producer of that ingredient would be required to uphold that standard. And at any time they're found to have exceeded, then of course there could be regulatory action.
And a good producer, Terry, we provide everyone with our analysis from third party. We don't do our own. We want to show third party analysis of what the concentrations are.
Okay. Bill? You
Yes,
got patient?
I think everybody's kind of answered my question in his pieces and parts. I do think somewhere along the way, because of the nature and the sensitivity about the use of this and adulteration and consumer acceptance, and perception, what have you, I think whole plant versus pieces and parts need to be somehow in this discussion, okay?
Yep.
Not getting into the nutritional makeup or the medicinal, whatever. The other thing is, I think just today, a standard operating procedure, feedlots and dairies pretty routinely test their ingredients. Certain times of the year, aflatoxin becomes a standard test on every load. So I think if you are going to test everything, and that's kind of like a feed manufacturer saying this sack of feed or this load of feed will meet minimum requirements, I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, and I think that's helpful to know. And Terry, looking at question one, I think question one sort of does answer whole plant versus parts of plant, right? And when you combine that with level 6, the maximum allowable level of cannabinoids, I think you get
In a finished ingredient.
probably.
I wanted to shift gears a little bit.
Sure.
This is Wendy, to question 2.
Yep.
What I wonder is if, as part of this process, should we be submitting, in the report recommendations? So should we be comparing parts of the plan and then listing the pros and cons of each part and also submitting recommendations? So I guess that's what I see is missing from number 2.
I think that's
Is that-
saying two things. I think you're saying one thing and that's saying something else. I think that's saying submission of application, like for AFCO. I think you're talking the submission of the completion of this
Exactly.
study.
Exactly.
So yes, to your answer, how this study submission should be, the industry, not this work group, the hemp industry will be the one submitting for AFCO in the end of whatever we end up going with.
But we need legislation, right? So my impression, this is going to legislators.
No.
So- No, okay, it's not, okay.
Well, and the question
Could.
about legislation.
Could, but not in Veronica's model.
Number 4, legislation, right.
Yeah.
Well, so we could go back to legislation next year and say, can we do another study for CBD and hemp? Or
Right.
CBD and hemp and animal food?
Yeah.
That's what we could do next year.
Right. But and this goes without saying, but there's tons and tons of resistance to taking any sort of local legislative action because it would put us in violation
Yeah.
federally, right? So that's why,
But then why does 4 say if Colorado were to approve and agree? Oh, I see, just to discuss that.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So this
Yeah.
is just purely federal, okay.
yeah, and some of these are sort of beach bally questions,
Sure.
but we just want to make sure everybody's moving along the same.
So let's talk, this is Terry, Colorado County. Let's talk about 4. Is that a legitimate consideration?
Yes.
Well, Bill, look out. If an ingredient definition or a feed additive petition or one of the other pathways, that's gonna give national, it's gonna apply nationally.
Yes. Yeah, but if Colorado would have approved something that wasn't nationally
Yeah.
approved, the answer to the question has already been answered. It's happened.
should we get rid of
There's
it?
adequate case law in abundance.
The federal
So we
preemptive-
could just squash 4
Yeah.
and
And just say
say,
we're not going that direction.
just not going that direction. Show of thumbs, who's okay with that, recognizing that interstate commerce, there would be a long list of issues.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the problem that exists now, is different states are doing
Yeah.
different things, right?
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay,
So,
objection on the phone to striking number 4? It almost might be some introductory comment, almost why we have chosen, the group recommends, the group has learned, the group proposes what you have.
why it's not a viable option.
Yeah, why you wouldn't go that way.
Okay, so do I strike it?
Yeah.
Seems like it, yeah, I'm getting a lot of thumbs behind it. Okay, David?
Yeah, I had a couple changes on, what's now questions 8 and 9, it was 9 and 10.
Okay.
And it just, in 8 there, it's just a parenthetical, the hemp registry program in Colorado, I don't think that's relevant to what we're talking about, because that's only cultivation and harvesting of industrial hemp plants, not about making any ingredients, so
Strike
I
that.
don't think that belongs in there. And Farm Bill is not a regulatory program, that is simply an allowance for research by certain institutions, so I don't think that belongs in there. What I do think ought to be in there, though, is we don't have any mention of state regulatory agencies here. And so there is the program in our Department of Agriculture here for regulating animal feeds.
Comma CDA.
And, yeah, in Colorado CDA. And then,
But they don't have a process in the approval process. Only the federal side does, not the state side.
they don't have anyone.
They don't have any activity in the federal approval process. They just regulate the federal approval.
Right, but we're.
Are there, yeah, so the question is, are there other state laws beyond approval?
Right.
Right, beyond the approval, are there other regulatory concerns?
Oh,
So I think it's
beyond
fairly
the-
harmless to
okay,
add
gotcha.
comma CDA and ask the
Just
questions.
departments of ag.
Yeah.
And then the other thing, I'm just wondering if this belongs in here, this is actually getting more into human food, but if we're talking about raising livestock that people eat, it matters, and that's the CDPHE, the Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment.
Right.
That they register commercial food manufacturers.
Right. Or grain
So
storage.
that was my comment on question 8, and then 9, I just think it should be pluralized again to not this ingredient, but these ingredients.
Seems logical, it's consistent.
Yeah, this is Chris Whitman, and on 9, I would like to add that the